Michael and his granddaughter Floriana took seats near the stage, giving them a close view of the models parading in beautiful festive dresses. 14-year-old Floriana was fond of fashion design and even attended a special school. In her dreams, the girl saw herself as a famous couturier, and her family, as it is supposed to, supported Floriana in her endeavours. So Michael had managed to get tickets to a show featuring a young fashion designer that Floriana adored. Upon hearing the news, Floriana exclaimed joyfully, "Really? You bought tickets?" Her mother Christy smiled at Michael and said, "Daddy, you are so good." Once again Michael felt like a hero. He would do anything for his daughter and grandchildren, including securing tickets to a fashion show. Floriana carefully prepared for the event, choosing her outfit and applying light makeup. Michael thought his granddaughter was beautiful without it, but he understood her desire to dress up and beautify herself. He had raised his daughter alone since she was 7 and knew girls liked to dress up. During the show, Floriana excitedly whispered to Michael, "Grandpa, Gloria Polono is coming out now." Gloria Polono? So the designer is a woman? Interesting to see my granddaughter's idol, Michael mused, relieved that it was a fashion designer, Floriana's role model, rather than the dazzling models showcasing the outfits. First, the models strutted onto the runway, smiling broadly at the audience. Then she appeared. Michael initially doubted his eyes, thinking his eyesight was deceiving him. He looked again. No, it's her, the orphan girl from my hometown. What a surprise! "Oh, I wish I could get her autograph," Floriana sighed dreamily. "We certainly will," Michael confidently asserted, taking his granddaughter's hand and making their way towards the stage. He was sure that Gloria would recognize him too. Michael used to see an elderly woman and a girl around 13 to 14 years old almost daily on his way home from work. He lived in a new suburban community, not far from a quiet, fading village. Most of the villagers who could afford to had long since moved away. Only the poor who couldn't afford a better place to live remained. Michael knew the elderly woman and the girl were from that village. Locals would often show up at the small farmers' market near the bus stop, selling their goods. Evidently, this grandmother and her granddaughter were doing their best to get by. Their makeshift counter displayed seasonal berries, vegetables, and fruits, indicating that likely they had a vegetable garden. They were clearly familiar with the local forest's berry and mushroom spots. During winter, they mostly sold homemade pickles. Occasionally, they sold old items like books or toys, which the girl probably used to play with. Michael often noticed their homemade goods, including knit socks, scarves, and hats. These colourful and stylish items were in high demand. Initially, Michael paid them no mind, having no need for homemade pies or pickles. However, one blustery day in mid-November, he found himself unable to drive past. The sight of the girl in her thin second-hand coat and the elderly woman shivering in the wind sparked a deep sympathy within him. He realized that only desperation could drive people to stand here in such harsh weather. Michael stopped the car next to a familiar couple and bought the rest of their goods, a couple of jars of pickles and strawberry jam, and a knitted scarf in a pink colour. The colour reminded him of his daughter Christy when she was a child. He bought the scarf, thinking his granddaughter Floriana might like it. She was only 2 at the time, but children grow up so quickly. "Are you really going to take all this?" the girl asked incredulously. Michael looked at her and felt a warmth in his heart. The frail girl reminded him of his own daughter Christy, who was similarly thin, wide-eyed and dark-haired. However, Christy had never worn such an old coat or worn-out boots. At 13, Michael's daughter studied hard, went out with friends, flew with her father to the sea. This girl's fate seemed much less fortunate. "Did you knit this?" Michael asked the elderly woman, pointing at the pink scarf. He wanted to lighten the tension a bit. "No, my granddaughter Gloria did it. She's got golden hands." "Wow," Michael winked at the girl. "You sure are talented." "Thank you," Gloria responded, a bit embarrassed but clearly pleased. That evening, Michael pulled a photo album off the shelf. His daughter Christy and Gloria looked similar. Christy was already an adult living in the capital. She studied economics there and found a job. Michael had once dreamed that Christy would take over his small dairy business, which he had built from scratch. But Christy had different plans. Michael didn't pressure Christy or try to change her mind. He understood that everyone has their own path. Christy was never particularly interested in this business and had a fiancé back in the capital. Fortunately, Donovan turned out to be a good man. Michael was naturally worried about his daughter's future and who she might encounter along the way, but his concerns were unfounded. Christy had a good judgment of character and chose a worthy husband. Her husband was kind, cheerful, caring and hard-working. Michael's worries eased when Christy introduced her fiancé to him. The young couple bought an apartment in the capital and both embarked on their individual careers, achieving success in their respective fields. A significant event then occurred in Michael's life. His granddaughter was born. The joy of the new grandfather was unparalleled. He put aside all his business in his hometown to meet his granddaughter. "Dad, why don't you sell your factory? It doesn't bring in much money anyway. If you move here, closer to us, it'll be better for everyone," Christy suggested. Michael, cradling his little granddaughter, was initially inclined to agree. However, he changed his mind as he considered the factory his brainchild and responsibility. He had invested so much effort, soul, time and energy into it that it pained him to think of passing it to someone else. He also felt a responsibility towards his staff. He couldn't predict the new owner's actions. They might even lay off all the workers. At that moment, Michael wasn't ready to let go of everything. Besides, he couldn't imagine living in the capital as a retiree. "Maybe later, when I'm old, decrepit and helpless," he said to his daughter, who understood and didn't pressure him further. Later on, Christy and Donovan had a son named Alan. Michael, overjoyed by his grandchildren, often visited his daughter's family, and they visited him in return. Being close to his loved ones and caring for his grandchildren brought him immense happiness. At first, Michael had doubts. Christy grew up without a mother. Could she give her children what she herself had not experienced? Motherly love, care and understanding. Christy had only ever had her father, Michael, who deliberately remained unmarried and didn't bring any women home, despite having some affairs. He didn't want Christy to have a stepmother. Having heard of many unfortunate stories, he believed it was unlikely for a woman unrelated to them to love his child sincerely and wholly. He never wanted Christy to feel discomfort, jealousy, or irritation, or to feel like an outsider. Michael was content with his own life. He and his daughter shared a close bond. Christy's mother, Laurie, was beautiful. She was an orphan and knew nothing about her relatives, and grew up in an orphanage. Michael met her at an amusement park, where they were both with their friends. The groups merged, resulting in a joyful and lively gathering. Michael was immediately drawn to the dark-haired, big-eyed girl, but he was shy, embarrassed to show her his feelings. Laurie herself understood everything, smiled encouragingly, asked some question, and that was it. The awkwardness was melted like snow in spring. At that time, Michael had not yet thought of his own dairy. He did not even aspire to such heights. He was yesterday's student, who worked in a design bureau for a mere salary, rented a tiny apartment, and everything suited him, in principle. Laurie, an orphan, lived in a small state-provided apartment. It was a disadvantaged neighborhood. The girl was always afraid to return home alone. Well, Michael accompanied her, with pleasure, that very evening of acquaintance, and soon she moved in with him. Soon the couple got married, and Michael felt truly happy with Laurie, except that the man couldn't get away from the feeling that she didn't love him as much as he loved her. It showed in many ways, but Michael, falling in love with her, was ready to forgive her anything. Laurie always aspired to a beautiful life. She liked to dress up well, dine in cafes and restaurants, and dreamed of a car and travelling. It was for her sake that Michael started thinking about his own business. He decided to establish a dairy. Why such a business? Michael's grandfather used to work at such a factory, and he often took little Michael with him, so Michael knew from a young age how and what worked there. Initially, they needed money to start. Loans were taken, and all funds, as is typical in the early stages, were invested in the business. Michael was grateful for the help he received from friends and family who supported his plans. When the plant later started generating a stable profit, he didn't forget any of them. Laurie, however, was not content with their financial constraints at the very beginning. She desired immediate success and didn't believe in her husband's venture. By that time, they already had their daughter, Christy. Laurie often told Michael, "You're a loser. Nothing will work out for you. You're just wasting money." Michael tried to reassure her, presenting the promising prospects of their business and insisting they just needed to be patient. But Laurie didn't want to wait. And then one day, she left. Michael returned home from the office, where he often worked long hours during the business startup phase, to find a distraught Christy alone on the sofa. "Where's Mummy?" he asked, sensing something was amiss.
"She's gone to another city. She said we wouldn't see each other for a long time,"
Christy replied through her tears. Michael scooped up his daughter, holding her close, his heart pounding. A note on the dresser caught his eye. Laurie's farewell letter. She informed him that she had found a man, rich, successful, not a failure, and a loser like you, she wrote in her message. It turned out that this man had finished some business in the city and went to the other side of the country, to his homeland. And he took Laurie with him. "I deserve a better life," Laurie wrote. "You can't provide that for me. I've decided to start anew. Don't look for me. I leave our daughter with you, and I have already filed for divorce." It was evident that Laurie had carefully planned her departure. Despite the subsequent discussions about custody, Michael never understood why Laurie hadn't been honest with him. Why the need for deception? At first, little Christy missed her mother and waited for her. However, Michael never said anything bad about her. A mother is a mother. But as time passed, Christy adapted to her new life. She knew she had a mother somewhere, but her life had moved on, and it seemed there was no room for Laurie's presence. Michael made every effort to minimize Christy's suffering from her mother's absence. He showered her with attention and strove to be a friend to her, nurturing a warm and trusting relationship. The difficulties he faced were not about household chores, as he quickly learned to braid hair, iron dresses, cook, and maintain a clean home. His apprehension lay in the enormity of his task as a man raising a girl. He feared he might not be up to the challenge. However, life proved his fears unwarranted. Christy grew up to be a successful, beautiful, and responsible woman, and an exceptional mother. Everything turned out well. After that first short conversation with the grandmother and the granddaughter, Michael never passed by them again. Whenever he saw them, he would stop, purchase something, and overpay, despite their protests. He realized they truly needed assistance.
"You spoil us,"
said the elderly lady.
"God bless you."
"I can afford it, especially since I can't live without your pickles." Indeed, Michael genuinely loved the old woman's pickles and pies. The pickles were surprisingly soft and flavorful, and such pies couldn't be found in any bakery. Michael was also fond of the items Gloria knitted: socks, scarves, hats. When she learned that Michael had grandchildren, Gloria started knitting adorable things for Floriana and Alan. Christy admired them, and Michael never failed to bring these gifts to the capital. "Does such a young girl create all of this?" Christy used to ask. "I can hardly believe it myself," Michael smiled. "She's talented." "Yes, you're right, Dad. That girl is incredibly talented." Eventually, Michael learned a lot about the lives of Gloria and her grandmother. Both had endured tough times, which was immediately apparent. They lived in a small house in a neighbouring village, with a sagging roof and squeaky floors. Everything in the house needed repair, but there was no money, and they were physically drained. They managed to survive, patching up wallpapers and filling in wall cracks. Every morning, Gloria went to school with a neighbour, an elderly man who worked in the district centre where the school was located. Since his workplace and Gloria's school were on the same route, it was convenient for both. However, Gloria returned home on her own. After a quick lunch, she and her grandmother would go to the market to sell goods. The grandmother would prepare the goods before Gloria's return from school. In the evening they would return home. While the grandmother prepared dinner, Gloria would sit down to study. Although she found studying difficult, especially after a long day of trading, the girl never let her grandmother sell goods alone. She knew it would be hard for her, and she felt sorry for her. In her rare spare time, Gloria knitted, a skill taught by her grandmother. Gloria had been fascinated by knitting since she was 5. She admired her grandmother's deft handiwork, producing beautiful items like socks, vests, and scarves. Intrigued, and considering it magical, little Gloria asked her grandmother to teach her knitting. Her grandmother, thinking it would be a fleeting interest, taught her, but to her surprise, Gloria learned quickly and developed a love for it. Starting with knitting for her dolls, Gloria progressed to creating real items for people. By the age of 10, Gloria had become an expert knitter, able to create items both quickly and skillfully. The grandmother was particularly amazed by her granddaughter's imagination. The girl created unique models, original patterns, and invented her own knitting techniques. Her creations were unique and unlike anything else. The neighbours also praised the girl. One day, a friend of her grandmother suggested selling Gloria's creations. On the first day, everything sold out. It was a huge success. From then on, Gloria knitted for sale when she had time. However, she could only knit a lot during the holidays because her regular schedule was packed with studies. Her grandmother emphasized the importance of education and dreamt of seeing Gloria as a nurse or an economist. Gloria, on the other hand, wanted to be a designer and create interesting clothing models. She even sketched out her designs for dresses, coats, and accessories across several notebooks. However, the elderly lady viewed these ambitions as mere fantasies. She saw the profession of a designer as unreliable. "Where will you find a job afterwards?" she would ask Gloria, who could only shrug in response. Over time, Gloria began to believe that her grandmother was right. She started to think it was better to choose a more stable and down-to-earth profession rather than chase unattainable dreams. "You are almost an orphan," the grandmother often told her. "I won't be around forever. I'm already old. You must stand on your own 2 feet. Your grades won't get you into nursing or economics. Consider becoming a cook or a hairdresser. You'll earn money. There is no one you can rely on, so you must plan for your future." Yes, Gloria was an orphan. Once she had a mother, the beautiful and carefree Megan. Megan was raised without a father, who drowned saving a neighbour's property from a flood. She was less than a year old at the time, so her mother raised her alone, providing for her needs, but not having the time or energy for warmth or tenderness. She didn't want to study. She didn't want to work at home either. She had only one care: to go out with friends and girlfriends. The mother scolded, tried to punish, but to no avail. The girl grew up and stopped obeying at all. Mother and daughter frequently fought, and each argument would end the same way. Megan would storm out of the house, seeking refuge with her friends, who were always willing to provide shelter. Eventually, Megan and 2 other girls ran away from home to the city, hoping to start anew. However, they lacked a solid plan. Her mother looked for her, even got the police involved, but to no avail. Well, they found her, brought her home, and Megan ran away again the next morning. "Well, You can't keep someone chained up or watch them every minute. Megan's distraught mother held on to the hope that her daughter would eventually realize the harsh realities of city life, the necessity to work for sustenance, and the difficulty of finding respectable employment without an education. She believed life would teach Megan these lessons. However, things didn't turn out as hoped. Young Megan quickly found admirers who provided for her, leading her down a path to nowhere. As she descended into this abyss, her mother could only watch helplessly. News about Megan's life reached her mother through the children of neighbours who had also moved to the city and occasionally spotted Megan. The mother herself occasionally visited her daughter, bringing food and money, each time noting with a heavy heart how her daughter appeared increasingly unkempt and frail. Megan hung out a lot, and this could not but reflect on her appearance. Dishevelled hair, swollen face, unhealthy thinness, and some alien voice, cocking hoarse. There was no trace of Megan's former tenderness and beauty. Her mother tried to organise her daughter in the hospital, offered a way out of a difficult situation, never tired of repeating that she would always be near, help, support. She constantly asked her to come back. "You're asking me to go back to this hole of ours? No way," smirked Megan. "I'm not going back there. It's better here. It's more fun. It's real life here." Megan's real life involved constant drinking and hanging out with marginal friends. Naturally, her mother blamed herself for her daughter's situation. She believed she had failed to provide a proper upbringing, having spent 24 hours at work with the assumption that Megan would grow up to be a good person on her own. Now, she felt she had missed out. This guilt weighed heavily on the woman's soul. She tried to fix everything, to change, but more and more clearly realized that she could not do it. One evening, a neighbor arrived at her house unexpectedly. Her daughter worked as a nurse at the local maternity hospital. "You've got a granddaughter," the neighbor announced from the doorstep. "A granddaughter? I visited Megan a few months ago, and she didn't appear pregnant." "Your granddaughter was born prematurely, but she's surprisingly healthy, and your Megan wants to give the baby up. Maybe you could take her in. It's not right if the baby ends up in an orphanage." The next morning, the shocked grandmother visited the maternity hospital. The head doctor made it clear that her granddaughter would not be given to her so easily. The age was considerable, the conditions were unsuitable, and she advised her to influence Megan. However, the new mother flatly refused. "Why do I need these problems? What kind of mother am I?" Megan was right. Entrusting the baby to her wasn't an option. "A baby brings benefits, financial ones at least. You'll get money for it." "But I'll have to spend money on the baby. Diapers, formula, medicine, plus the constant crying, cleaning up after her, feeding her over and over again. It's not a good deal." "Megan, let me take the girl. Officially she'll be yours, but I'll raise her until you're ready. Is that okay with you?" Megan's mother had already seen her granddaughter and even held her in her arms. Her heart was completely won over by this tiny, warm bundle with a cute snub nose and long eyelashes. She couldn't bear the thought of the baby ending up in a state facility. How would she be treated there? What fate awaited the girl? Especially as a premature baby, she needed special care. Megan agreed to let her daughter stay with her mother. "If you want her that much, take her, but don't count on my help. I don't need a baby right now." Megan left the hospital and continued her life. The girl, named Gloria by her grandmother, stayed with her. With Gloria's arrival, her grandmother's life changed, becoming brighter and more meaningful. Caring for Gloria was no easy task, but it brought great joy to her grandmother. Whenever she felt tired, a glance at Gloria's clear eyes, her smile, or her gentle voice would instantly alleviate her worries, filling her heart with joy and warmth. Life was challenging for both of them. Megan received a child allowance, a small payment for keeping Gloria in the family instead of sending her to an orphanage. The grandmother's salary was modest, and she couldn't work as much as before, since Gloria was still a baby. Despite these hardships, she never complained. Gloria's presence made her happier and stronger. The woman hoped Megan would mature. Occasionally she would show up at her mother's small village house for a visit, as if to visit Gloria, but in reality she came to eat, sleep, and endure another challenging period. Gloria didn't inspire affection in Megan. In fact, she found her own daughter difficult to tolerate. She was bothered by Gloria's chatter, frequent crying, and constant demands. Nevertheless, there was hope that maternal feelings would eventually surface in Megan, perhaps when Gloria was a bit older. And then the irreparable happened. Megan died. There was a fire in the apartment, where there was another party. The wooden building located on the city's outskirts was engulfed in flames. None of the intoxicated occupants survived, though the sober neighbours managed to escape. Thus Gloria became an orphan. Her mother was gone, and her father's identity and whereabouts were unknown. In reality, not much had changed in Gloria's life, because she had lived without her mother before. For her grandmother, however, the hope that everything would eventually be fine had died. From then on, the grandmother and granddaughter lived together, scrimping and saving, always trying to earn an extra penny. They seemed to be managing well enough, even though it required significant effort from both of them. Having learned about their story, Michael felt an increased respect and sympathy for them. He assisted them by continuing to purchase their goods and offering them money, knowing they were saving up to repair their decaying home. He could have easily paid for the repairs and genuinely wanted to, but pride, or embarrassment, prevented the grandmother and granddaughter from accepting his offer. The elderly woman always declined the money. "We'll manage, Michael, don't worry. You're already helping us a lot. We're not that helpless or destitute. We're fine." One day, while returning home from town, Michael saw an unusual scene. Only Gloria was standing at the counter, her grandmother nowhere in sight. Michael stopped his car and approached Gloria, who had matured from an awkward teenager into a beautiful young woman. "Wow, it's only been 3 years. Kids grow up so fast," he suddenly thought to himself. "Hey, why are you all alone? Where's your grandma?" "She's sick." "Is it something serious?" Michael worried. "Maybe she needs medicine. Did you call a doctor?" "It's like a cold or something. She's got a bad cough. Her neighbour made her a herbal infusion. It should help." "If you need anything, don't hesitate to call me. You have my phone number?" Michael offered. "Okay," Gloria promised. "Thank you so much." "Let me take your stuff, and you can go home to your grandmother. Do you need a ride?" "No, thanks. It's not far. I'll walk." Michael left on a business trip the next day. He was gone for about a month, and upon his return, he was swamped with work at the plant, working day and night in the office. One day, while driving past the place where Gloria and her grandmother usually shopped, he noticed their absence. He didn't think much of it at the time. After all, they weren't there every day, and perhaps they had already finished their work. However, when Gloria and her grandmother didn't appear the following day, or even the day after, Michael began to worry. He hadn't realized how attached he had become to the old woman and the girl. They were no longer strangers to him, but people he cared about. Sincere, grateful, decent, good and simple. Their well-being had become important to him. The man knew which village Gloria and her grandmother lived in, and even had a rough idea of their house's location. Gloria had described it as on the village outskirts next to a large oak tree, with an abandoned house nearby. Based on these clues, he didn't anticipate difficulty finding their humble abode. As expected, Michael found the small, run-down house, without much trouble. Despite never having visited before, he knew where to go and what to look for. thanks to Gloria's and her grandmother's descriptions. He knocked loudly on the gate but received no response. The gate was unlocked, so he pushed it gently and approached the house. It was in dire need of repair, and its condition was worse than he'd imagined. The man chastised himself mentally for not visiting Gloria and her grandmother earlier. He should have fixed this dilapidated place long ago. The house door was locked, and the shutters were closed, with no one responding to his knocks. Michael decided to ask the neighbours about Gloria and her grandmother. He had a bad feeling about the situation. The house across the street seemed inhabited, as laundry was drying on a line and smoke was trickling from the chimney. He decided to seek help from these neighbours. An elderly woman, still robust, quick-eyed and energetic, opened the door. "Hello," Michael said. "I'm looking for my acquaintances who live here, a girl named Gloria and her grandmother." "And who are you?" asked the elderly woman, suspiciously furrowing her eyebrows. "I'm not quite sure how to explain. A friend, I suppose, or perhaps a regular customer. Gloria, her grandmother, and I—" "I see," the woman nodded. "You're Michael. Gloria and Anna have spoken highly of you. You're a good man. So what brings you here?" "Well, I was away, and when I returned, they weren't around. They're usually out selling their goods, but they've disappeared. I thought I'd check in case something was wrong. Maybe they need some help." "So, you're unaware," the elderly woman said, shaking her head with a hint of sadness. "Gloria mentioned she lost your phone number accidentally. She wanted to call you when it happened." "What happened?" "Anna, Gloria's grandmother, fell ill. She had a bad cough and was weak. We initially thought it was a cold and treated her with herbal remedies, but her condition worsened. We called a doctor and discovered it was her heart causing the cough. Polly was taken to a city hospital, and even the doctors couldn't help her. She passed away." The news of her grandmother's death was a massive blow to Gloria. She was not herself. We all empathized with her, supporting her as best we could. All the neighbours understood what losing her grandmother, who had raised her, meant to Gloria. Money for the funeral was collected by everyone. After the funeral, Gloria reflected on her future. She had no desire to remain in her small, crumbling house in the tiny village, where she had lived only for her grandmother. Having completed only school, she recognized the need for further education to avoid wasting a year. Gloria needed advice from a seasoned, life-wise adult. She considered reaching you, Michael, but you had disappeared, and she had lost your phone number. She speculated that you might have moved to the capital to be with your daughter and grandchildren, as your daughter had long been urging you to do. Following this train of thought, Gloria decided to move to the capital city. "There are more opportunities there. I'll find my way," Gloria said to us, and all we could do is wish her the best. We were concerned for Gloria, who had spent her whole life in this remote village and was unfamiliar with the wider world. However, we also understood that our dwindling village offered little for a young woman. She needed to forge her own path, build a career, and stand on her own 2 feet. After taking the remaining money, which was very little, Gloria left for the station early in the morning with a light backpack on her shoulders. That was the last time she was seen in the village. "Probably she's doing well in the city," mused an elderly neighbour. "Ah, Gloria, she's good, responsible, mature. She has her head on straight. Or maybe something happened to her. I don't know, but she never came back." Michael gave the neighbour his phone number, asking her to call him at any time if Gloria suddenly returned. He felt a sense of responsibility for this sweet, naive and vulnerable girl. The neighbour was right. Anything could have happened to Gloria in the capital. She was inexperienced in life and unfamiliar with people. How could a young girl survive alone in such a large metropolis full of human predators? Michael regretted giving the girl his phone number without asking for hers in return. As it turned out, the neighbours also didn't have her number. Years passed. Michael eventually moved to the capital to live with his daughter, sold his house in his hometown, and handed over his business to capable hands. The business had been struggling and Michael couldn't keep up. A young, energetic entrepreneur seemed to be the right person to restore the dairy business to its former state. Michael carefully chose the successor for his business, and the selling price was not his main concern. Michael bought an apartment near his daughter's house in a charming new neighbourhood. There was a park with a picturesque pond nearby, and Michael loved to visit it with his grandchildren, Floriana and Alan. Initially, Michael considered finding a job. However, with his daughter and son-in-law absorbed in their careers, and their children left with a nanny he found too strict, Michael decided to care for his grandchildren. This decision brought him immense joy after being apart from his family for so long. Thankfully, Michael's substantial sum of money from his business job meant he didn't need to work. Thus, he devoted his time to his grandchildren. His daily routine included waking them up, feeding them, driving them to and from the school, helping with homework, and accompanying them to extracurricular activities. Floriana was into dance and design, while Alan enjoyed chess and karate. He also regularly took them to contests, tournaments, competitions, and children's parties. When Michael asked how Christy coped without him, she replied, "We were like hamsters on a wheel. Now we can work in peace. Thank you, Daddy. You're a tremendous help." Michael enjoyed being a necessary part of his daughter and her husband's life, and he cherished his time with his grandchildren. They had developed a warm, friendly relationship. Michael seemed to understand his grandchildren better than their parents did, knowing what they wanted, understanding their moods, and offering support when needed. Time passed quickly, and Michael watched with a hint of sadness as his grandchildren grew up. Floriana and Alan would soon be independent. Michael wished time could be slowed down, even if just for a while. Floriana continued her passion for design, and Michael sometimes saw a reflection of Gloria in her. The man often wondered about Gloria's life now. Michael noticed a fashion show announcement while walking home from the store. The poster on a pole near the bus stop advertised a young couture's fashion show at a nearby concert hall. Michael knew Floriana would be interested in it and decided to buy tickets. He managed to secure the best seats near the stage, ensuring a memorable experience for his granddaughter. His 14-year-old granddaughter was overjoyed. "Grandpa, you're the best! This is such a fantastic show, but it's going to end late and I have school in the morning. Perhaps I can convince your parents to let you miss a day." At this suggestion, Floriana affectionately hugged her grandfather, then jumped and clapped her hands joyously. Despite her age, she sometimes exhibited the emotional exuberance of a child, a trait that her grandfather Michael adored. They spent the evening at the fashion show, where Floriana, with a keen eye, scrutinized the models' costumes and shared her professional opinions with Michael. He was proud of his granddaughter's insight and knew she was destined for success. Towards the end of the event, a young woman who was strikingly similar to Gloria, a poor orphan girl Michael had known, took the stage. The more Michael studied her face, the more he became convinced it was Gloria. The name matched too. Such coincidences were rare. Michael promised Floriana that they would get Gloria's autograph, which excited Floriana so much she clapped her hands again. Soon they were navigating through the crowd towards Gloria, who was radiating joy. Michael gave her a bouquet that he and Floriana had prepared. As Gloria looked at Michael, recognition flashed in her eyes. For a moment, her smile faded, and her eyebrows arched in surprise. She stared at Michael, clearly recalling their past encounter. Gloria leaned towards Michael over the hum of the crowd and asked him to wait at the 5th exit from the hall. Michael nodded, took Floriana's hand, and positioned himself at the specified exit. "Grandpa, do you even know her?" Floriana exclaimed, barely containing her joy. "Is she really coming up to us?" Gloria didn't come in person. Instead, she sent an assistant. The young man guided Michael and Floriana into the dressing room where they met Gloria. She looked radiant, delighted with her success, and slightly weary. Gloria approached Michael, locked eyes with him, and smiled. "Michael, is it really you?" "I could ask the same. Gloria, is it you?"
he responded. That's me, Gloria nodded. And this young lady, is she your granddaughter, Floriana? Floriana was taken aback upon hearing her name uttered by the star. The idea of her idol knowing her name was mind-boggling. Wow, you remember my granddaughter's name? Michael was astonished. Well, how could I not? I designed many children's outfits because of this girl, whom I haven't even met once. And overall, you've had a significant influence on my life and my choices. How? Michael queried. Well, first you helped me and my grandmother. You helped us out a lot. Looking at you, I wanted to be as strong, rich and kind. I wanted to help someone too, and now I have organized a fund to help children from poor families and orphanages, like I was myself many years ago. We help them find themselves in life, help them not to go down the wrong path. In general, we support them as much as we can. You're an excellent person. I don't even have words. By the way, you're the one who made me believe in myself. My clothes, well, the ones I knitted, they were also praised by my neighbours. But you were the only one who said I was talented, that I'd be great. You really believed in me. You can't even imagine how it helped me in life. I really followed my dream and achieved my dream. I had a little bit of luck there too, but if I had done nothing, nothing would have happened. And I did not give up, including thanks to your words, because of your faith in me. It was like wings behind my back, an invisible support. Gloria, I was looking for you and your grandmother. I came back from a business trip and you were gone. I went to the village and found your house. The neighbours said what had happened to your grandmother and that you had gone to the capital and disappeared completely. That's precisely what happened, Gloria nodded. Why should I have stayed there? I needed your advice at that moment, but I lost the phone number you gave me accidentally. So, I suppose you could say, I ended up nowhere. Are you going to tell us what happened afterward? Michael asked. Of course. I didn't think we'd ever meet again. You can't imagine how excited I am about this meeting. Me neither. I'm delighted too. I mean, I've been remembering you, thinking about you, worrying about you. And now I see a successful young woman in front of me. You realized your talent after all. Yes, I did realize it all in the end. Have a seat. And you, Floriana, sit down. Gloria gestured towards the soft leather sofa in the corner. My story is not short. After her grandmother's funeral, Gloria moved to the capital. With little money and some savings, plus a bit of help from her neighbours, she managed to rent a small room in an old 2-story house near the train station. She then set out to pursue an education. Gloria did not consider prestigious economic and law colleges, instead opting for something similar. She initially thought of becoming a chef or a pastry chef, but fate had other plans. Gloria stumbled upon an ad for an apprentice tailor position at a studio, which promised a certificate at the end of the course and even offered some salary. After some consideration, Gloria decided to take a chance. The studio's owner, Mrs. Jansen, took a liking to her bright student. Often praising her and using her as a role model for other employees, Mrs. Jansen even increased Gloria's salary due to her performance and creativity. Gloria handled the most intricate orders, adjusted clothes to fit perfectly, and expertly repaired even noticeable tears. Most importantly, she always had innovative ideas to improve dresses, suits, and trousers. Gloria had some money. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to rent a better apartment and even save a little. Mrs. Jansen, aware of her young employee's circumstance, advised and cared for her. Then Gloria fell in love for the first time. She was so in love with Tyler, a part-time loader at a nearby store, that she lost her head. Tyler was a tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed man with a wide smile and strong hands. He approached Gloria first, complimenting her and asking her name. "I like you a lot. I've been watching you for a long time. You're a beautiful girl, and you seem kind. A rare combination these days." Gloria, looking into his bright blue eyes, melted at his words. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. It was delightful to be liked, especially by such a handsome and charming guy. Tyler accompanied Gloria to the bus stop that evening, and the next day he approached her again, talking to her as if they were old friends. Gloria was happy. She waited for Tyler to appear again, just as she had hoped. As they got to know each other, Gloria learned that Tyler, like her, was from a remote village. However, he came from a large, poor family. He moved to the city to earn money and help his mother raise his younger siblings. He sent almost all of his earnings to his family and lived in a cheap hostel. Gloria found this very noble. After Tyler's revelation, her affection for him grew. He seemed reliable and responsible, an ideal life partner due to his commitment to his family. Soon she invited Tyler to move in with her. There was no need for him to stay in a hostel. She relished every moment they spent together, glad to no longer be alone. Tyler showered Gloria with care and warmth. They spent a lot of time together, discussing every topic under the sun. Before long, she considered him her closest and dearest. However, Mrs. Jansen did not share the same sentiment. "He seems insincere and slippery," she commented. "He's a good man," argued Gloria. "Yesterday I came home from work, and he prepared dinner and washed the floors." "It's not a hard thing to do," Mrs. Jansen argued. "It feels like he's gaining your trust. Be careful with him." Unfortunately, Mrs. Jansen's suspicions proved correct. One day, Gloria returned home to find Tyler and his belongings gone, along with her money box. She had been saving up for her own place, and despite Mrs. Jansen's advice to deposit her savings in a bank, she had kept them at her home. Tyler knew about the money because Gloria had told him. She didn't hide anything from him, and he exploited her trust. So it happened that he never truly loved her. He merely exploited the kindness and naivety of a young girl. He lived in her apartment, ate at her expense, and then vanished with a substantial sum of money. "It's all right, dear," Mrs. Jansen comforted the sobbing Gloria. "It's good that he left on his own. You should steer clear of such people. Consider the lost money as payment for a life lesson. From now on, be more cautious about who you let in." Gloria found herself in a precarious financial situation. She had to pay 6 months' worth of rent, plus expenses for food, clothing, and utilities. Her savings were depleted. Everyday activities and good service helped distract her from the pain caused by the deceitful Tyler. It was also challenging to accept that the man she loved was just a common swindler. In this challenging moment, she remembered her old way of earning money. She resumed knitting and sewing items and started selling them in the local market for craftsmen. She desperately needed the money. And then, Gloria glanced at her silent listeners and smiled. And then, as the saying goes, when one door closes, another opens. As it turned out, Tyler did me a favor. If it hadn't been for him, I would never have gone to the market with my things, and Paul would never have noticed me. Gloria, already aware that her creations were unique and popular, didn't pay much attention to the stylishly dressed young man scrutinizing her goods. It wasn't unusual for her creations to attract interest, and this man was no exception. He bought a couple of scarves and a decorative headband, paying more than the asking price, which pleased Gloria. The following evening he returned, this time accompanied by an elegant middle-aged woman. They were Eleanor and Paul, mother and son, and owners of a famous fashion house in the capital. They offered Gloria a job, promising a significantly higher salary and promising prospects. "That's how I got lucky," Gloria said. "Not just lucky," Michael replied, shaking his head in disbelief. "You've been working towards this all your life, since you were a child." "Well, maybe so," agreed Gloria.
She had achieved her dream job, creating unique clothes for clients' requests. Her designs were showcased by runway models, and critics unanimously praised her work. The success was dizzying and exhilarating. Gloria relished in the creative process and earned a substantial income from it. Soon, she was able to fulfill a long-held dream of buying an apartment in the capital. Now a renowned fashion designer, her designs were showcased globally and worn by celebrities. Gloria successfully established her own popular brand. She had a loving husband and 2 sons. She was both happy and successful. "I'm proud of you," Michael said with affection. Floriana, meanwhile, gaped at her idol. Hearing this success story was clearly inspiring for her. I'm thrilled we met," Gloria smiled. "You are one of the people I wanted to personally thank. You've been a great help to me. You've showed me the importance of being kind and strong in this life. And you gave me confidence in my talent. That's been very supportive. By the way, would you like to meet my family? I've told my husband a lot about you." "With great pleasure," Michael and Floriana responded in unison.
Hola, suscríbete a Historias Vitales para no perderte nuevas historias. Mi esposa había estado trabajando en su proyecto especial durante 4 meses ahora. No era su proyecto personal, pero ella era la persona principal y responsable de su éxito. El proyecto estaba diseñado para salvar a su empresa, Bixler Enterprises. Los últimos 4 meses habían sido difíciles porque se vio obligada a trabajar duro. Era importante tanto para ella como para la empresa. Había una buena posibilidad de que Bixler Enterprises quebrara si el proyecto no se completaba. Sara tenía una licenciatura de Albrecht y un MBA de Wharton. Era la más inteligente de la familia. Yo empecé a trabajar como mecánico de autos justo después de la secundaria y después de 21 años seguía siendo mecánico de autos. No me importaba porque me gustaba el trabajo y pagaba bien. Era suficiente para pagar la universidad de Sara y criar a 2 hijos. No vivíamos lujosamente, pero estábamos bien. Los niños ya se habían mudado, y las cosas iban bastante bien con nuestros ingresos. Sara quedó embarazada 3 meses después de casarnos a la edad de 18 años. Durante los primeros años de nuestro matrimonio, vivimos con mis padres. Ellos tenían una gran casa vacía ya que 4 de mis hermanos se habían mudado. Eso significaba que teníamos una niñera mientras Sara completaba sus primeros años de universidad. Debido a 2 embarazos, la carrera de 4 años le llevó 6 años completarla. Fue difícil, pero lo logró. Siempre tuve trabajo y nunca me faltó trabajo extra si lo necesitaba. Después de que Sara se graduó de Wharton, alquilamos nuestro propio lugar. Tuvo ofertas de trabajo de varias empresas grandes, pero todas requerían que nos mudáramos. A mí no me importaba, pero Sara quería quedarse cerca de casa. Por eso decidió trabajar en Bixler Enterprises. Pagaba bien, pero lo más importante, le daba responsabilidad y la oportunidad de avanzar. Sara era una empleada trabajadora y dedicada. La presentación es el jueves en el Hotel Thyssen en Filadelfia. Tomé unos días libres en el trabajo para ayudarla según fuera necesario. Al final, todo lo que logré fue hacerle algo de comer cuando llegaba a casa. No sabía nada sobre su trabajo, ni tampoco quería saber. Los negocios corporativos de alto nivel me aburrían. Empresarios de Europa, Asia y América del Sur venían aquí, la empresa pagaba sus boletos de avión y proporcionaba habitaciones en el Hotel Thyssen mientras estaban aquí. Era caro como el infierno, y por algunas cosas que Sara había dicho, la empresa estaba sobreestimando sus finanzas. Su presentación era importante para ella, para la empresa y para más de 200 empleados. Hasta el martes por la noche, todo iba bien. Sara llegó a casa con un traje nuevo, un traje gris con una blusa blanca. Desplegó todo lo que necesitaba en la cama de la habitación de invitados. Cuando se trataba de la limpieza de la casa, ella era normal, pero cuando se trataba del trabajo, era meticulosa. No entendía por qué necesitaba sacar su ropa interior de lujo, pero no dije nada. Además de su traje para la presentación, tenía varios vestidos de cóctel lindos para eventos sociales antes y después del evento. Siempre había evitado tales eventos, pero me sentía obligado a ir con ella si ella quería que lo hiciera. Me agradeció la oferta, pero dijo que no era necesario. Todos los materiales y equipos que necesitaba estaban guardados ordenadamente en el maletero de su Volvo. Antes de salir del trabajo, ella misma conducía el coche para asegurarse de que todo estuviera en perfectas condiciones. Tenía todo el día miércoles para prepararse y toda la noche del miércoles para socializar con sus invitados. Sara era tan buena en lo que hacía que sentía que habría sido mejor si simplemente me hubiera mantenido alejado de ella. Finalmente, había terminado. Lo había revisado y vuelto a revisar todo. Todo lo que necesitaba ahora era una ducha caliente y una buena noche de sueño. Supongo que mi error fue que empecé a revisar sus cosas después de que Sara comenzara a ducharse. Pensé que estaba ayudando, pero resultó ser lo contrario. Estaba moviendo cosas en la cama cuando un pequeño sobre blanco cayó del bolsillo lateral de su bolso de maquillaje. Una carta de una farmacia, pero no del tipo que solemos usar. Dentro había 10 pastillas. No tenía idea de qué era, Pren, y las instrucciones eran confusas. Si es necesario, tomar una pastilla y luego una segunda pastilla 12 horas después. Pensé que podría ser algo que ella había conseguido para la ansiedad o los nervios, pero las instrucciones no tenían sentido. La receta estaba escrita a su nombre el lunes. Volví a poner el sobre en su lugar mientras ella terminaba de ducharse. Decidí que quería saber más sobre Pren antes de contarle sobre ello. Por supuesto, si lo mencionaba, significaría que estaba revisando sus cosas. Odio los dilemas. Mientras Sara se preparaba para dormir, fui a nuestro ordenador doméstico y busqué. 10 minutos después, me uní a mi esposa bajo las sábanas. Pasé toda la noche despierto, preguntándome por qué mi esposa había recogido una receta para la píldora del día después, especialmente después de que me hicieran una vasectomía hace 10 años. A la mañana siguiente, me levanté temprano, pero no estaba descansado. Di un largo paseo, esperando que despejara mi mente. Me dirigí hacia casa con reticencia, temiendo lo que podría hacer o decir cuando llegara allí. Mi hijo Joe se unió a la Marina después de la escuela secundaria y estaba en su primer año en San Diego. Nuestra hija Gloria se casó con su amor de la infancia el año pasado y acababa de mudarse a Dallas. Eso dejaba solo a Sara y a mí. Echaba de menos a los niños, pero esperaba envejecer con mi esposa. Ella era la única mujer que me había interesado, y ahora todo estaba. Si Sara estaba teniendo una aventura, lo ocultaba bien. Por supuesto, nunca la vigilé. Nunca miré sus correos electrónicos o llamadas telefónicas. No tenía razones para hacerlo. No tenía forma de saber qué estaba haciendo en el trabajo o después del trabajo. Confiaba en ella completamente. Ion, ¿dónde demonios has estado? ¿Quieres huevos o algo? No, solo café. No me sentía con muchas ganas de hablar. ¿Qué pasa, cariño? Solo son 3 días. Puedes venir si quieres, pero te aburrirás como una ostra. No, realmente no quiero ir, pero odio dejarte sola. Me preocupo cuando no estás aquí. Es muy dulce, querido, pero estará bien. No voy a salir del hotel en todo este tiempo. Pasaré la mayor parte del día asegurándome de que la sala de conferencias esté lista, y esta noche tendré una agradable charla con nuestros posibles clientes. Mañana, probablemente ni siquiera tendré la oportunidad de ir al baño. Llegaré a casa lo más temprano posible el viernes, te prometo un gran fin de semana si sabes a lo que me refiero. Todo eso suena bien, pero no puedes culparme por preocuparme. Soy un mecánico de autos, y tengo una esposa hermosa y exitosa. A veces tengo la sensación de que estás menos interesada en mejorar nuestra situación familiar que en avanzar en tu carrera. Detente, maldita sea, Ion. Siempre he respetado lo que haces para ganarte la vida y nunca he insinuado lo contrario. Criaste a 2 grandes niños y me pusiste a través de la universidad. Eres un gran esposo, un gran padre y un buen proveedor, y nunca olvides eso. Terminé mi café mientras ella recogía la mesa. ¿Quieres que te llame? No, no es una buena idea. Tendré el móvil apagado, y voy a apagar el teléfono de la habitación por la noche para poder dormir. Te llamaré siempre que pueda. La ayudé a cargar el coche, era tan meticulosa con eso como con todo lo demás. Trabajando, le llevaría 3 horas llegar al Hotel Thyssen. Me quedé en el porche y la vi marcharse. No me molesté en preguntarle por las pastillas. Pasé el resto de la mañana en el porche. No recuerdo haberme preocupado tanto como ahora. Me sentía pequeño e insignificante. Me sentía fuera de mi liga. Era un tipo de pueblo con un trabajo mediocre y una esposa exitosa. Era una combinación equivocada. Debería haberlo notado antes. Me sentía estúpido. El mejor traje que tenía era una chaqueta azul y un par de pantalones. Al menos tenía algunas corbatas, aunque tenían 10 años de antigüedad. Acababa de terminar de vestirme cuando sonó el teléfono fijo. Oye, cariño, solo quería avisarte de que llegué bien. ¿Tuviste un buen viaje? Supongo que el tráfico no estaba demasiado denso. Estuvo bien. Te llamaré esta noche. Ahora tengo que irme. Estoy en la habitación 714, Sara. Puedo estar en casa de mis padres o en la de mis hermanos esta noche si quieres llamarme a mi móvil. De acuerdo. Suena el teléfono móvil. Te quiero, tengo que irme. Me tomé mi tiempo para llegar a Filadelfia. No fui directo al Thyssen, primero me detuve y compré un filete con queso. Prometí hacer una larga noche. No estaba seguro de qué iba a hacer. Estacioné en el garaje del hotel y simplemente esperé. Tarde o temprano, tenía que entrar en el hotel. Simplemente no podía decidir cuándo hacerlo. El sonido de mi teléfono celular me ayudó a tomar mi decisión. Ion, solo quería avisarte de que todo se ha arreglado. Ahora voy a bajar para encontrarme con algunas personas y cenar. No olvidaste nada, ¿verdad? No, todo está bien. Tengo todo en mi habitación para mañana. ¿Necesitas algo? No, Ion, relájate. Voy a apagar mi teléfono. Te llamaré mañana por la mañana. ¿De acuerdo? Ríe, diviértete. No es divertido, Ion, es trabajo. No parecía estar demasiado fuera de lugar. El vestíbulo, el restaurante y las salas de conferencias estaban llenos de gente, así que pude pasar desapercibido. Había un folleto pequeño y bonito que mostraba el diseño de todas las habitaciones del hotel. Me paseé por las diferentes habitaciones y me detuve en las paredes, mirando alrededor entre la multitud. No tenía ni idea de qué haría si Sara me veía. Lo averiguaría si y cuando eso sucediera. Encontré un tablero de eventos que enumeraba todas las habitaciones que estaban siendo utilizadas por los diversos grupos. Bixler Enterprises no tenía habitaciones disponibles para el miércoles por la noche. Esto me pareció interesante. Sara había dicho que no iba a salir del hotel, pero ahora no estaba tan seguro de eso. Había 3 comedores, familiar, informal y de alta cocina. A Sara no le gustaba mucho cenar con niños, así que fui primero al comedor informal. Solo me llevó 5 minutos asegurarme de que no estaba allí. Tuve mejor suerte en el salón gourmet, era una acogedora mesita encajada en la esquina, el tipo de mesa que la gente reserva para tener un encuentro privado. Sara llevaba un vestido de cóctel negro con un escote pronunciado y perlas, se veía elegante y su acompañante parecía apreciarlo. Conocía a algunas personas con las que trabajaba Sara, y él no era una de ellas. Me resultaba familiar, pero no había forma de que pudiera recordarlo. Había muchas sillas libres, así que no tuve problemas para cruzar la sala. Había velas y pequeños candelabros de cristal en las mesas. Apagué la mía y le dije al camarero que me molestaba por el glaucoma. Pedí el plato de pollo de siempre y me acomodé. El camarero me sirvió el café por tercera vez. Disculpe, el tipo en la mesa de enfrente me parece muy familiar. ¿Sabes quién es? Sí, ese es Malcolm Eugene Foote. Es miembro del Consejo Municipal, se espera que se postule para el Congreso en los próximos años. ¿Es esa su esposa con él? Es muy bonita. No, esta es la primera vez que la veo. Siempre usa esa mesa para señoras especiales, si me entiende. Simplemente le sonreí y pedí la cuenta. Nunca había visto a Sara tan sensual con un hombre antes. Parecía captar cada palabra que decía, como si fuera Dios o algo así. No estaban haciendo nada inapropiado, pero tampoco era platónico ni profesional. Cuando me fui, estaban terminando su segunda botella de vino. Ahora entendía por qué se había llevado su lencería elegante. Me acomodé en una esquina del vestíbulo para que no me vieran. 10 minutos después, salieron del restaurante. Ella le tomaba la mano mientras caminaban por el vestíbulo hacia el ascensor. Observé cuidadosamente los indicadores de piso. Que el ascensor se detuviera en el tercer piso era una buena señal, significaba que no lo había llevado a su habitación. Era una mala señal cuando el ascensor no llegaba al séptimo piso, significaba que ella fue a su habitación. Por si acaso me equivocaba en algo, me senté en el vestíbulo y observé el ascensor durante 1 hora. La gente entraba y salía, pero Sara no estaba entre ellos. Saqué mi maleta vacía del coche y me dirigí al mostrador de recepción. Aunque podía demostrar que era su esposo, me costó trabajo conseguir una tarjeta llave. Se dieron después de llamar a la habitación, pero nadie respondió. Finalmente, estaba en camino a la habitación 714 con la tarjeta llave. Ni siquiera encendí las luces al principio, simplemente me senté en la oscuridad de la habitación durante más de 1 hora. No fue difícil asegurarme de que no regresara a la habitación. Primero, empacé todas sus ropas y pertenencias personales. No dejé nada atrás. Revisé el paquete de Preven, todavía quedaban 10 pastillas en el tocador. De manera muy ordenada, estaban todos los artículos que necesitaría para su presentación al día siguiente. Comencé a llenar la maleta. Había 24 carpetas promocionales especialmente encuadernadas y otras 20 carpetas regulares, todas ellas fueron a la maleta. Un proyector digital fue lo siguiente, seguido de una computadora portátil. Tomé su bolso y su celular, que había dejado en la habitación. Todo lo que tenía consigo era un bolso de mano y probablemente un tubo de lápiz labial. Di una vuelta por la habitación tan cuidadosamente como lo hizo ella para asegurarme de no perder nada. Una vez satisfecho, dejé las llaves del coche y mi anillo de bodas en el tocador. Aparte de esos 2 objetos, la habitación estaba completamente vacía. El ascensor se dirigió directamente al estacionamiento, no tuve problemas para llevar 2 maletas, y 20 minutos después, estaba en la autopista rumbo al norte. Pasaban las 3 de la madrugada, no tenía idea de que había pasado tanto tiempo. 1 hora o 2 después, sonó mi teléfono celular, la identificación de llamadas mostraba el número del Listen. ¿Ion? Sí, ¿dónde estás? Estaré en casa pronto. Eso fue todo lo que dije. Hubo silencio en el otro extremo de la línea. Los vendedores tienen un viejo dicho, el primero que habla pierde. Pareció una eternidad antes de que ella hablara. Ion, lo siento. No preguntó nada y simplemente colgó. Apagué mi teléfono, era obvio que había regresado a su habitación. Más tarde ese día, tenía que dar una presentación que salvaría a su empresa y le daría un ascenso. Metí las maletas en el desván del garaje. Sara nunca iba allí y nunca pensó en buscar algo allí. Por supuesto, en este punto, estoy bastante seguro de que no importaba. Primero, recogí todas mis ropas y pertenencias personales. La mayoría de los hombres tienen sus propias herramientas, generalmente es un requisito para el trabajo. Pasé por la tienda, cargué las mías en el Subaru y recogí mi último cheque de pago. Para entonces, los bancos ya estaban abiertos, no tuve que hacer ninguna manipulación financiera complicada. Simplemente retiré todo el dinero de mis cuentas. Almorcé en Hagerstown, Maryland. Tenía suficiente dinero para vivir durante unos años, pero sabía que estaría buscando trabajo muy pronto. Sara y yo éramos parecidos en eso de que a ambos nos encantaba trabajar. La voy a extrañar. Pasé un par de horas en las cuevas del Uray y alquilé una habitación cerca de Whitewell. No tenía idea de qué iba a hacer. Era sábado, y me encontré sentado en el acuario de Chattanooga, observando la naturaleza que nunca había visto antes. Pasé unas horas simplemente relajándome y decidí que era un buen lugar para estar. Compré un pase anual para el acuario y, para la hora de la cena, tenía un lugar donde quedarme. Era un remolque móvil en el parque, pero estaba amueblado y era económico. No necesitaba mucho. La primera cosa que haría el lunes por la mañana sería conseguir un trabajo. Un buen hombre de mantenimiento siempre puede conseguir un trabajo, especialmente si está dispuesto a trabajar duro. Podría permanecer discreto hasta que fuera el momento de renovar mi licencia de conducir o las etiquetas del coche, me preocuparé por eso cuando llegue el momento. El domingo por la tarde, llamé a Gloria. Me sentí obligado a informarle sobre lo que estaba sucediendo, pero Sara ya se lo había contado. Fue bastante franca con Gloria sobre lo que había pasado, dijo que había engañado, que la sorprendí, que me fui y que ella perdió su trabajo. Me sentí mal porque ella perdió su trabajo, pero ese era el precio que tenía que pagar. Le pedí a Gloria que le dijera a Josh lo que estaba sucediendo la próxima vez que hablara con él. También le dije que la llamaría aproximadamente una vez al mes para verificar cómo iban las cosas. No le dije dónde estaba. Para el mediodía del día siguiente, tenía un trabajo. En realidad, estaba a poca distancia del parque de remolques, con el Waffle House a mitad de camino. ¿Qué más podría querer un hombre? No sé cómo manejaron el papeleo, pero me estaban pagando $20 por hora sin hacer preguntas. Estaba feliz, y ellos también. Ni siquiera tendría que tocar el dinero que traje conmigo. Unos 2 meses después, Gloria me informó que Sara se había mudado de la casa y estaba viviendo con sus padres. Gloria no sabía nada más, pero estaba feliz de que estuviera estable y le estuviera yendo bien. Josh me llamó desde San Diego solo para informarme que iba a hacer un crucero. Era técnico en aviónica en un portaaviones, intentó explicar qué hacía exactamente, pero estaba más allá de mi comprensión. Nunca supe mucho sobre cosas técnicas. Ambos tuvieron cuidado de no decir nada malo sobre su madre, aprecié eso. Después de eso, todo siguió como siempre. Comencé a hablar con Gloria al menos semanalmente, Josh y yo comenzamos a enviar correos electrónicos regularmente. Gloria hablaba regularmente con Sara, pero decía muy poco sobre lo que estaba haciendo o dónde estaba. Nunca presenté la solicitud de divorcio, y parece que Sara tampoco lo hizo. Tengo una licencia de conducir de Tennessee y las etiquetas en el Subaru. Comencé a frecuentar un bar local un par de veces al mes y tuve encuentros casuales, 2 mujeres se alternaban como mis compañeras nocturnas regulares. No buscaban compromisos, y yo tampoco, parecía funcionar bien para todos nosotros. La vida era buena. Eso fue hace mucho tiempo, y gradualmente olvidé a Sara. Con el tiempo, el Subaru comenzó a darme problemas, había olvidado cuánto tiempo había pasado. Tenía más de 200,000 millas. Estaba reflexionando sobre esto con una jarra de cerveza un día cuando me di cuenta de que habían pasado casi 5 años desde que me fui de casa. Mantuve un contacto cercano con ambos hijos, Gloria ya tenía 2 hijos propios en este momento y quería que los visitara. Josh casi se casó con una mujer tailandesa, pero en el último momento, se negó. Por lo general, Trabajaba 6 días a la semana y usaba el domingo para recuperarme del sábado por la noche. No había ninguna buena razón para que alguien llamara a la puerta de mi remolque a las 6 de la mañana de un viernes. Su grosería fue recompensada por un hombre medio desnudo abriendo la puerta. Los calzoncillos del día son repugnantes, y la dama en la puerta, juzgando por la expresión en su rostro, estuvo de acuerdo conmigo. Ella apartó la mirada, pero su compañero no parecía impresionado. Norm habría usado pantalones, pero en un momento como este, los invitados me molestaron. Estamos buscando a John Terrell. No los conozco. Me llamo David Simmons, y esta es mi esposa Mara. Tenemos un problema y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Lo siento mucho, no trabajo a altas horas de la noche. Si necesitan algo relacionado con su auto, tendrán que ir a la tienda. Esto provocó varias miradas en blanco y finalmente una respuesta. No tiene nada que ver con tu trabajo, es más un problema personal. ¿Podemos entrar? El interior del remolque lucía desordenado, rara vez tenía invitados, así que rara vez lo limpiaba. Incluso mis novias insistían en que fuéramos a su lugar. Hagan como en su casa, déjenme ponerme los pantalones enseguida. Al entrar en el dormitorio, dejé la puerta abierta solo para mostrarles lo hospitalario que soy. También me puse una camisa. ¿Les gustaría tomar café? Solo tomará unos 10 minutos. Aparté algunas cosas del sofá para que pudieran sentarse. No hubo respuesta a la pregunta del café. Tenemos una hija adoptiva de 4 años y otra de 2 que necesita un trasplante de médula ósea, y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Estamos dispuestos a pagarte si es necesario. ¿Con mi médula ósea? No, queremos usarla y estamos dispuestos a compensarte por cualquier inconveniente. Creo que quieren comprarla. Estaba actuando como un listillo, y de repente me di cuenta de ello. Estas personas eran serias, tenían un problema real y estaban buscando ayuda. Lo siento mucho, no quise interrumpir. Por favor, continúen. Nuestra mejor oportunidad de encontrar un donante es un familiar cercano. Eres nuestra mejor esperanza. Mira esto. No quiero ser un grosero, pero creo que se equivocaron de persona. ¿Cuándo nació su hija? Cumplirá 5 años en julio. Marche Simmons habló por primera vez, y sonó sincera. Odio ser el portador de malas noticias, pero me hice una vasectomía hace 15 años. No hay forma de que pueda ser su padre. ¿Por qué tu nombre estaba en el certificado de nacimiento? No puedo responder eso, tal vez deberían preguntarle a su madre. Esa afirmación fue recibida con silencio. Sentí pena por estas personas, pero no sabía cómo ayudarles. ¿Cuál es el nombre de la madre? Sarah Lise Terrell. No encontraba las palabras. Tal vez no debería haber tomado esas malditas pastillas de ella, por supuesto, entonces esas personas no tendrían una hija en absoluto. Todo lo que pensaba que había superado el dolor, y aquí está de nuevo, viejos recuerdos de mi esposa teniendo relaciones sexuales con ese maldito político de Filadelfia. Estaba empezando a olvidarlo todo, y ahora estaba de vuelta. Maldita sea. Ahora entiendo y pido disculpas por mi grosería e insensibilidad. Haré todo lo que esté en mi poder para ayudarles. En primer lugar, porque no puede Sara hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Médicamente, no puede. ¿Por qué no? Es madre, tiene que ser una donante adecuada. Oh, ella es una donante adecuada, pero está demasiado enferma. Los médicos se negaron siquiera a considerar utilizarla. ¿Enferma de qué? Está muriendo de insuficiencia hepática. Le quedan menos de 6 meses de vida. Esto no tiene sentido. Siempre ha estado perfectamente sana. Además, no creo que un hígado enfermo le impida donar médula ósea. El hospital no aceptará su firma en el formulario de consentimiento. ¿Estás diciendo que hay algo mal en su cabeza? Ambos me miraron en silencio, sabían la respuesta, pero no querían decirlo. En ese momento, no quería que se sintieran aún más incómodos. Hace 10 minutos, no me importaban, pero ahora sentía que tenía que protegerlos y ayudarlos. ¿Cómo sucedió esto? ¿Podría alguno de mis hijos ayudar? Quizás, pero pensamos que eras nuestra mejor esperanza. ¿Por qué no van tras su padre, su verdadero padre? Pensamos que eras tú. No tenemos ni idea de quién más podría ser. Sara no nos dijo nada sobre otro posible padre. De hecho, ella no estaba en condiciones de explicar nada, agregó Mara. Obtuvimos la mayoría de nuestra información de la agencia de adopción. Tuve que preparar café y hacer pis, permítanme un momento. Dejé a mis invitados sentados mientras preparaba el café. Solo tomó unos minutos. Mientras se preparaba, fui al baño, algo que necesitaba hacer urgentemente. Traté de ser discreto, ya había avergonzado lo suficiente a Mara. ¿Dónde viven? En Westchester, Pensilvania. Les haré una oferta. Si les digo quién es el verdadero padre de su hija, deben prometerme que lo perseguirán sin descanso hasta obtener lo que desean. ¿De qué estás hablando? El padre de su hija es un político prominente en Pensilvania. Por supuesto, negará todo y probablemente les proporcionará documentos legales para detener sus esfuerzos. Si acuerdan presionar lo suficiente para que él admita que la niña es suya, podrán avergonzarlo y obligarlo a hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Eso es lo que quieren, ¿verdad? Sí, claro, pero ¿cómo hacemos eso? No lo sé. Soy mecánico. Trabajo con metal para ganarme la vida. Creo que la mejor manera sería utilizar la televisión, la radio y los periódicos. Los políticos harán cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. ¿Tienen amigos que puedan ayudar? Bueno, ahora ambos estaban sonriendo. Debo haber dicho algo que les dio esperanza. Creo que podemos hacer esto. ¿Quién demonios es él? Malcolm Eugene Foote. Se postula para el Senado de los Estados Unidos. Apuesto a que hará cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. El café estaba listo, pero David y Marshall no podían esperar para llegar a casa. Antes de irse, les dije cómo ponerse en contacto con Gloria y Josh en caso de que los necesitaran. Estaba seguro de que ayudarían. También les pedí que me dijeran dónde estaba Sara. Probablemente estaría en Pensacola antes de que ellos regresaran a Westchester. Me corté el pelo y compré una camisa nueva. Sara era una tramposa que arruinó mi vida, pero aún así quería lucir bien cuando la viera. Era otro remolque, pero esta vez era un bonito doble nuevo. Allí estaba su Volvo con una llanta desinflada y un parabrisas roto. La mujer que abrió la puerta no era Sara, parecía que la habían empapado fuerte y la habían dejado empapada. Tenía al menos 45, tal vez 50, y debió haber tenido una vida difícil. La falta de maquillaje no ayudaba, y simplemente se veía horrible. No tuve la oportunidad de abrir la boca. Caray, si no es John Terrell. Nunca esperé verte aquí. Tuve que usar la vieja línea, me estás poniendo en desventaja. Sherry Hart. Pasa, entra. ¿Quieres una cerveza? No, pero gracias. Estoy aquí para ver a Sara. Sherry cruzó la habitación y se detuvo en el buffet del comedor. Aquí está, John. Mírala todo lo que quieras. Su mano señalaba una urna de latón que estaba en el centro del buffet vacío. Supongo que llegué demasiado tarde. No me moví, solo me quedé mirando el contenedor frente a mí. ¿Puedo tomar una cerveza ahora? Sara se mudó a Pensacola después de dar a su bebé en adopción. Compró el remolque con el dinero que recibió de Bixler Enterprises después de que la despidieron. Tenía una participación en las ganancias, 401k, y vacaciones y días de enfermedad. Eventualmente, consiguió un trabajo en una fábrica local de prendas de vestir donde trabajaba en el departamento de envíos. Allí fue donde conoció a Sherry. Sherry alquilaba una habitación de Sara. Cada centavo que Sara ganaba iba para el alcohol. Empezó con vino y gradualmente pasó a bebidas más fuertes, las más baratas. Eventualmente, perdió su trabajo debido a su alcoholismo y se vio obligada a usar sus ahorros. Nunca salió con nadie ni salió a ningún lado. Serry se quedó con ella, pagó sus servicios públicos y compró alimentos que Sara no comía. Le llevó más de 3 años quitarse la vida. Increíblemente, ella tenía un testamento y me dejó un doble remolque y un Volvo. Serry explicó que Sara estaba tan angustiada por lo que había hecho que simplemente se rindió. No intentó evitar el embarazo ni siquiera terminarlo. La adopción se había arreglado meses antes de que naciera el bebé. Nunca volvió a trabajar, excepto en los trabajos clandestinos que hacía mal. Serry dijo que Sara no parecía tener ambición ni propósito en la vida. Sara hablaba mucho de mí pero tenía miedo de intentar contactarme. Gloria le dio mi número, pero nunca me llamó. Era como si su aventura de una noche la hubiera lastimado más a ella que a mí. Estuve allí durante 2 semanas y luego vendí el remolque de Serry por $1 y obtuve $3,000 por el Volvo. 2 días después, estaba en Westchester visitando a mis nuevos amigos David y Marche. Malcolm Eugene Foot resistió al principio, pero David y Marche lo presionaron hasta que cedió. Insistió en pruebas de ADN, que demostraron que era el padre. Para salvar la cara, más o menos lo obligaron a someterse a un trasplante de médula ósea, que fue exitoso. La carrera política y la vida familiar de Malcolm no dejaron una impresión favorable. Su caída en las encuestas fue tan rápida que el partido lo reemplazó por otro candidato unos meses antes de las elecciones. Su esposa solicitó el divorcio y fue muy pública al respecto. Sara y yo estamos viajando ahora a Dallas para ver a Gloria y a mis nietos. No sé cuánto tiempo mantendré a Sara conmigo, probablemente hasta que tenga a alguien.